The recent deaths of 2 shipworkers in a mysterious drone strike on an oil tanker highlighted a shadow war between Iran and Israel that could escalate into a real war. We compared the militaries of the 2 sides and found that while Iran has many number advantages, Israel has some crucial quality advantages. Here are the details. We looked at the military strength of Iran and Israel and found that Iran's much larger population of 84 million versus the roughly 9 million people in Israel allows Iran to field an active duty force of 525,000 troops, compared to Israel's 170,000. Iran has more tanks, but these are mostly T-72s and copies of the T-54 and T-55, which are widely considered inferior to Israel's Merkava Mark IV. Israel's air force is larger and much more modern than Iran's, with 66 F-15s, 175 F-16s, and at least 27 F-35 stealth fighters, with plans to own 75 F-35s in total. Iran's air force consists of 63 old F-4s and 26 old F-14s, as well as 19 MiG-29s and 23 Su-24s from Russia and 17 F-7s from China. Israel also possesses 48 attack helicopters compared to Iran's 12. Iran's navy is larger and is modernizing, but Israel's navy has advanced missiles and vessels, and it can likely also launch nuclear-armed cruise missiles from its 5 Dolphin-class submarines, which are believed to operate near the Persian Gulf. Thanks to US-led sanctions, Iran likely has no nuclear weapons on its 29 submarines. Iran pursued nuclear capabilities in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and while Tehran says it doesn't seek nuclear weapons now, its recent enrichment activity has raised questions about its true aims. After years of a shadow war between Iran and Israel, in which both sides used clandestine strikes against each other's commercial and military ships, a British guard and a Romanian sailor have now been killed in a suicide drone strike on an oil tanker. Here are the details. The Associated Press reports that the UK and US joined Israel in saying Iran was behind an attack on an Israeli-operated oil tanker that killed 2 people, and have vowed to respond, calling it a violation of international law. U.S. Navy explosive experts believe a drone strike hit the tanker off the coast of Oman, killing a British security guard and a Romanian shipworker. The strike hit the bridge of the tanker Mercer Street on the night of Thursday, July 29th. It marks the first known fatal attack after years of assaults on commercial shipping in the region linked to tensions with Iran. While no one has claimed responsibility for the attack, Israeli officials alleged Tehran launched the drone strike against a ship that was being operated by an Israeli company. Iran denied the allegations and said Israel killed the shipworkers in a false flag attack designed to show Iran in a bad light. The attack comes after years of tit-for-tat attacks in which Israel and Iran use clandestine methods to attack each other's commercial and military ships, using limpet mines, drones, and other methods to cause damage. A U.S. official speaking on condition of anonymity said the attack appeared to have involved several drones, including a so-called suicide drone, which was presumably responsible for pressing home the attack itself. 2 ships of the Iranian Navy have rounded the southern tip of Africa, becoming the first Iranian Navy ships to ever enter the Atlantic Ocean. This comes just days after Iran's largest Navy ship caught fire and sank. It appears that the 2 Iranian ships are heading for Venezuela, which would have significant geopolitical ramifications. Here are the details. The Drive reports that 2 ships of the Iranian Navy have reportedly rounded South Africa's Cape of Good Hope and appear to be heading into the Atlantic Ocean. The 2 ships are the frigate Sahand and the Makran, a converted tanker that looks like it's designed to be a mobile base. This latest news comes 2 days after the Karg, one of Iran's largest and most important naval ships, sank after suffering a major fire, the causes of which remain unclear. This would be the first time Iranian naval vessels have operated in the Atlantic, and previous reports have indicated that their final destination is in Venezuela, where they might offload a shipment of weapons. While it is still unclear if the ships are carrying any weapons, satellite imagery suggests the Makran is carrying a number of small, fast-attack boats that Iran has used to harass U.S. naval ships in the Persian Gulf. If Iranian Navy vessels gain the ability to operate in the Atlantic, analysts say it would be a significant step forward for Iran, which has tried and failed to do so in the past. The Pentagon says the delivery of Iranian weapons to Venezuela would be a provocative act and a threat to America's partners in the Western Hemisphere. The Pentagon said, "We would reserve the right to take appropriate measures in concert with our partners to deter the delivery or transit of such weapons." Since the 1980s, U.S. aid to Israel of around $3 billion per year has been seen as unconditional. That's according to Stephen Walt, a professor of international affairs at the Harvard Kennedy School, cited by Al Jazeera. The idea has been able to rely on bipartisan support from both Democrats and Republicans throughout that time, after the U.S. initially offered aid conditional on Israel signing a peace treaty with Egypt at the end of the 1970s. After recent news events, however, cracks are appearing on the U.S. side of that arrangement. Here's what you need to know. President Joe Biden is being challenged from within the Democratic Party over the $3.8 billion of aid the U.S. sends to Israel every year, according to the BBC. Senator Bernie Sanders, for one, has said the U.S. should look hard at how the money is spent. Almost all U.S. aid to Israel comes in the form of military assistance, and its annual grants represent around 20% of the overall Israeli defense budget, according to a 2020 report by the Congressional Research Service. Israel has used billions of dollars on gaining military superiority over its neighbors. For example, purchasing 50 F-35 fighter jets, which can be used for missile attacks, or last year purchasing 8 KC-46A Boeing aircraft. Of the $3.8 billion given to Israel in 2020, $500 million, or around 13%, was used for missile defense systems. These include that Iron Dome system, toward which the U.S. has contributed $1.6 billion since 2011. Since 2016, the U.S. has also spent $177.5 million on anti-tunnel capabilities that detect, map, and neutralize underground tunnels that threaten itself or Israel. To date, the U.S. has provided Israel with $146 billion in military and missile defense funding, and its military spending commitments have steadily increased over the last 3 decades under the Clinton, Bush, and Obama administrations. According to the BBC, since World War II, Israel has received more U.S. aid in total than any other country. In 2019, the last one-year period with fully reported figures, it was only receiving less aid than Afghanistan, a country that will receive much less aid now that U.S. troops are set to leave. The context for Israeli funding is changing, however. Last month, in the House of Representatives, U.S. Congresswoman Betty McCollum introduced a bill asking for guarantees that U.S. aid is not used in abuses against Palestinians, according to Al Jazeera. Meanwhile, last week, Democrats in both houses introduced resolutions aimed at blocking a new $735 million arms sale to Israel, according to The Guardian. While unlikely to pass, they reflect a 2021 Gallup poll showing 25% of Americans now sympathize more with Palestinians than Israelis, an increase of 6 percentage points since 2018. Of course, ties between the U.S. and Israel will not disappear overnight. The relationship is long-lasting and based on numerous factors, according to the Congressional Research Service report. These include what it calls shared strategic goals in the Middle East, a mutual commitment to democratic values, and historical connections originating from U.S. support for Israel's creation in 1948. So if it changes, it may well change slowly.
For more news animations and explainers, hit the subscribe and bell button to join the TomoNews family. Thanks for watching.